Thanks for tuning in to the MoveMind Podcast. This episode, we're going to talk about periodization, specifically with strength and conditioning in mind for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Ultimately, we could sum up this idea as training over time beats the workout of the day every time. So let's dive straight in and explore these ideas of working out, the Western cultural term, loving to get a workout in, versus training. What are the differences? Because there's some key ones, and it's critical to understand that strength and conditioning for BJJ specifically, but S&C in general, isn't just working out, and this is training over time. So what is the workout culture? Working out? Well, it ain't training, and let's explore exactly why. So S&C is not working out in the sense of doing a workout of the day. So CrossFit is pretty notorious for this, workout of the day, the WODs. There's no link between what you did last training session or last workout and what you're going to do in this workout. It's random, it's a workout of the day, it's a bunch of exercises mixed together with no real purpose, just to get you sweating, ideally leaving a chalk outline on the floor when you're done, as a measure of success or as a measure of a good workout. Okay. Another form that you'll see in the workout culture is people asking themselves the question, what do I feel like doing today? I turn up at the gym and I just spend time on doing what I want. Okay. What do I feel workouts? Again, hard to make consistent gains when you train like that, unless you're really meticulous in logging your workouts and in what you're doing. It's pretty ambiguous and it's hard to build on session to session. Another form of the workout culture that you'll see a lot is the chest and tries, back and buys, bro split, which we've all done. And it's really the kind of workouts that are focused on single joint work. Okay, the bicep curl being a prime example. A few multi-joint exercises, but a lot of the time it's just mostly the pseudo bodybuilding approach to the bro split. It's kind of like a bit of hypertrophy, a bit of strength, kind of nothing really too useful on either end. And it's breaking training down into, or breaking workouts down into body parts. Okay, again, not ideal, especially for what we're doing for jiu-jitsu and S&C on sport performance front. And then another form of the workout culture that you'll see is just going to fitness classes. Okay, so a class that isn't periodized, it's really just focused on sweating, burning calories, or just getting a ridiculous amount of volume in there. So the insanity workouts were popular for a while. They come to mind. Again, no real purpose to it, no real programming to it. It's just designed to leave you feeling butchered and sweaty at the end of it. And think, oh, that was a good workout. Okay, so working out is not what we're after. Okay, when it comes to strength and conditioning, so you've got to get this idea of like, yeah, I'm going to go for a good workout, kind of out of your mind. It's training for the sake of training, or it's exercising, I should say, for the sake of exercising, the workout culture. And that's not what we're trying to do. We're not trying to exercise for the sake of exercising. Jiu-jitsu alone is exercise. Anyone that's done it for any considerable period of time knows that it's hard work, and jiu-jitsu is exercise in its own right, especially the sparring. We don't just need to go to the gym and lift weights because we need more exercise. That's not what we're trying to do. We're training. So training means you're building qualities over time. Okay? And it's the over time piece which separates training from working out. Workouts are individual workout sessions with no real link, purpose, or otherwise, or at least not optimal purpose to them. Training is done over time, meaning it has a periodization component. Yeah, and training, it runs in cycles. So there is a cyclical nature to the training. General physical preparedness, or what we'll call GPP, is the type of training you're going to spend most of your time doing in the weight room for BJJ, especially in off season. If you're not competing, the GPP stuff is basically what you're going to be focusing your time on. We touched a little bit on GPP and what it kind of means in the last episode or two. It's a foundation. You're building a foundation so that more specific qualities can be built over time. Yeah, so your training sessions, your strength and conditioning sessions for jiu-jitsu, and any sport performance for that matter, are designed, they're actually designed, believe it or not, to bring about a specific adaptation or set of adaptations, providing that you can complete the amount of training sessions and recover fully going into the next training session. So they layer on each other over time. That's the periodization component. It's training over time, layering the training over time so that your adaptations can be built and we can improve specific qualities that we need when it comes to competition, or if we're not competing, maintain a general standard of said qualities until we need to specify and go a bit deeper down the wormhole for competition season. It's a pretty simple idea. Maintain a strong foundation. When we need to build specific things on top of it, we're ready to do so. Okay, not working out as you feel, session to session, with exercises based on various muscle groups. Okay, massive difference. So we talked about these specific adaptations for jiu-jitsu, especially when it comes to competitive season. What are these adaptations? What are these mysterious things that we want and are useful for jiu-jitsu players? Well, there's quite a few. Jiu-jitsu is a fascinating sport. There's a lot of faculties that make up jiu-jitsu in terms of qualities, attributes. So let's have a look at some of them, because this is going to inform our decisions, exercise selection, how the training sessions are programmed, periodized over time, etc. It all starts with this idea of analyzing the needs of the jiu-jitsu player, or conducting what we call a needs analysis for Brazilian jiu-jitsu as a sport. So let's have a look. Some of the attributes that we need as jiu-jitsu players. So maximum and sub-maximum strength. Okay, so let's have a look at just brief definitions. What does that mean? Maximum and sub-maximum strength. So the ability to express absolute strength levels, lifting heavy weights in the 90% region of your 1 rep max or above. And that would be the maximum strength def. Sub-maximum strength definition, the ability to move weights in the 70 to 90% of your 1 rep max bracket, usually for around 2 to 6 reps, and it's used to develop max strength. Okay, so maximal strength is expressing strength usually for one go, 1 rep. How much force can you produce? How much strength can you exert in that one go? And then sub-max, how much strength can you exert in the kind of 2 to 6 reps, 2 to 6 goes at a slightly lower weight or slightly lower resistance. We need that as jiu-jitsu players. Strength is now undoubtedly a useful component and a useful attribute for grapplers. Okay, so those qualities of strength, of which there's various different types which we're going to go into, but we need maximum levels of strength and sub-maximum levels of strength in order to build and develop that maximum level of strength. Okay, so max and sub-max strength is one of the qualities, one of the adaptations we're after. Explosive strength. Okay, so slightly different. Explosive strength defined as the ability to exert maximal force in minimal time. So as much force as possible, as quickly as possible. Okay, so explosive strength is a component of speed strength, if we're going to be nerdy about it, but it's the ability to exert a large amount of force in a minimal amount of time. Okay, blast double leg, takedown comes to mind. Yeah, blasting the double leg, running someone across the mats, a maximum amount of force as quickly as possible, minimal amount of time. So that's explosive strength. Yeah, so slightly different. There's a speed component to that. Another quality that you'll hear a lot about, I'm sure, is isometric strength, especially in the gi, but also in no gi too. Grappling in general requires a large degree of isometric strength, usually favoured around gripping, but also the legs have a part to play in isometric strength massively too. So what is isometric strength, definition-wise? It's the ability to produce force, yet again, by voluntarily contracting a muscle and then maintaining that contraction for a period of time. Yeah, so you've got somebody's collar, you're voluntarily squeezing your hand to grip the collar, and then you're maintaining that contraction for a period of time. If you're a white belt and it's your first competition, you're probably maintaining that collar grip for the entire match. Yeah, and you gas yourself out. So, long duration isometric strength training is useful for the grappler because it mimics what we do on the mat so often. We can hold a voluntary isometric contraction anywhere from 3 seconds to 2 minutes, depending on what's going on in the grappling exchange. So isometric strength is another form of strength that we need. So already you can see isometric strength, explosive strength, and max and submax strength. There's a few different types of strength there that we need to develop and adapt for to be able to utilize more effectively in our grappling. You're not going to get that just by training how you feel, especially if you're not even aware of those varieties of strength. Okay. Some other attributes then that we need for jiu-jitsu: strength endurance. Okay. Another form of strength expression, but you could say a little bit more specific. It's a strength quality displayed in activities that require long durations of muscle tension with minimal decrease in efficiency. So isometric strength is the voluntary contraction, producing force with a voluntary contraction, but long durations of muscle tension is in the strength endurance bracket. So your muscles have got to be able to contract and maintain those kind of contractions, maintain that muscle tension with a minimal decrease in efficiency. Yeah. If you can only grip someone's collar for 10 seconds before your arm gasses out completely, you need to work on strength endurance, right? You've got to be able to have the ability to hang on to those lapels and those sleeves and those grips, ideally for as long as you want, or at least for as long as the match requires. Going a little bit more then into the energy systems realm for the conditioning side. This is strength and conditioning, so there's a conditioning component too. Some of the needs then that we need, or some of the needs analysed for the conditioning side. Aerobic capacity. So what is aerobic capacity? It's your ability to utilise oxygen as your main fuel source. A lot of people think of this as their gas tank. And aerobic capacity impacts your ability to perform during a match. It impacts your ability to recover between matches. It impacts your ability to perform in a training session, and it impacts your ability to recover between training sessions. You might be aware and have come across other training programs that implement steady state aerobic work as a recovery method in programming. Yeah, sitting on a bike for half an hour, or going for long, brisk kind of walks, fast walks, or going swimming, or whatever it is. These are aerobic capacity methods, basically. They are utilizing the aerobic energy system, which is using oxygen as its main fuel source. If you have poor aerobic capacity, you're going to struggle to recover between rounds, even sparring rounds. Okay, so aerobic capacity is an important need for the BJJ player. Alactic power. Okay, so how quickly you can generate power, and that's demonstrated as your maximum output in a single effort. So think, how fast can you escape back mount in overtime EBI rules? Or how fast can you shoot that double leg takedown? Okay, your ability to do that in a single effort is alactic power. Power being the key term there. Alactic capacity. So how well can you repeat those alactic power efforts, those high level efforts? How many wrestling shots can you link together? How many positions can you link together in an explosive scramble, etc.? Okay, so alactic power, doing it once. Alactic capacity, linking it together for multiple efforts. And then we've got lactic capacity, arguably the energy system most closely related to competition. It's sustaining high levels of effort for long periods of time. So we usually break it down into about 30 seconds of work or more, 30 seconds minimum. Guard passing should come to mind. Right? Sometimes it can take minutes, 2-3 minutes to pass someone's guard. Lactic capacity is the energy system you really want to have primed and dialed in before you compete, especially. But it comes up in sparring sessions and just training in the off season all the time anyway. Okay, so sustaining high levels of effort for long periods of time. So that's a little bit on the energy system. So we've got a little bit on the strength realm, a little bit on the conditioning side, and then the kind of in-between bits, flexibility, mobility, and stability. So let's just go over the differences between those, because again, flexibility is required to a degree, mobility is required to a degree, and stability is required to a degree for the BJJ player. All of those faculties are challenged, and sometimes we need to improve the adaptations on some of those certain qualities to move forward, to progress, especially if we're lagging in some of those areas. So flexibility, passive flexibility specifically, is the ability of a muscle or muscle groups to lengthen passively through a range of motion. Okay, the passive standing forward fold. Can you touch your fingertips to your toes just by relaxing forwards passively? If your muscles are passively flexible, your muscles will be able to lengthen passively as you bend over and touch your toes. Okay. You've got dynamic flexibility, so the ability to perform dynamic movements to bring a limb through its full range of motion. So think pulling your knees to your chest in guard retention. Yeah. Lachlan Giles has got ridiculous dynamic flexibility in the way he can pull his knees towards his chest. He can almost get his knees like behind his armpits. It's a dynamic movement to swing the limb through its full range of motion. Yeah. Leg swings, standing leg swings. People that can leg swing and get their knee almost touching their nose and their foot above their head, swinging their leg up. Dynamic flexibility. Okay, so that's a component of the grappling exchange. And you've got static, active flexibility. So another form of flexibility. So that is the ability to assume and maintain an extended position using only the agonist and synergist muscle groups, whilst the antagonist muscles are being stretched. So there's some jargon in there, but think of this as not only swinging your knees to get them to your chest in guard retention, but holding your knees against your chest just by using your own contractive efforts without even using your hands. So keeping your knees tucked into your chest. It's quite difficult, especially if you're limited in the static active flexibility region. Defending a single leg, standing up, defending a single leg. Someone hikes your leg up onto their shoulder and tips you over in a single leg. The more static active flexibility you've got there, you can push your heel down and kind of defend it. Same thing when someone's holding your thigh for a single leg. Push your thigh, your hamstrings down. These are kind of components of static active flexibility. Okay, the easiest kind of example to think about static active is just stand and hold your leg out like you're doing a side kick, and just hold your leg out there. It's quite hard to do. Bruce Lee does it in one of his films where he holds his leg out, I think in Enter the Dragon, and he just does a 360 really slowly. That's static active flexibility. Okay, another component of the BJJ player. And then you've got, lastly, static passive flexibility, which is the ability to assume an extended position but maintain that position using only your weight, the support of your limbs, or the support of some piece of equipment. So if you've got good static passive flexibility in guard retention, or when someone's passing your guard and they pin your feet over your head and like fold you up, double you over. If you've got good levels of static passive flexibility, that won't be a problem for you. But if you're super, super tight, people might not even be able to put your feet over your head to the mat. That might be really uncomfortable for you, might even cause injury. Yeah, so you do need some levels of static passive flexibility in jiu-jitsu. Arguably, it's the static active flexibility and dynamic flexibility that translate best and translate over to sport performance the most. But that's not to say in jiu-jitsu there aren't moments where passive flexibility is actually kind of useful. It's usually when people are trying to fold you up and pass you, I find. And then we've got mobility and stability. A lot of times people confuse mobility and flexibility. Flexibility is to do with muscles. Okay, mobility is to do with joints. So we can define that as the ability of a joint to move actively through a range of motion. Okay, so someone who's got good mobility has the ability of a joint to move actively through its full range of motion. That's ideal. If you have average mobility, then it will move, through most of its range of motion. And if you have poor mobility, you'll only be able to move through a limited range of motion. Okay, so again, if you've got limited range of motion severely in certain joints, key joints, shoulders and hips, you're going to have a problem when it comes to grappling often with probably those joints, because they're not able to move actively through their own ranges of motion, and we need that. And then stability, we can define as the ability to control a joint or series of joints through their proper range of motion. So it's about joint control. Yeah, is the joint stable whilst it's moving through its range of motion? Okay, so you need joint stability. We don't want joints popping out and dislocating and, feeling loose. We want them to be stable, especially as jiu-jitsu is a dynamic and forceful sport. There's a lot of forces at play with a lot of crazy vectors and angles. We want stable joints. So there's a kind of, crash course, cheat sheet on the various qualities we're after for adaptations. Not going to happen going to a fitness class, I'm afraid. It's just not going to happen. I've never been to a fitness class where I'm like, wow, this is catered towards sport performance. Not to say it can't be done in a class format, but it ain't a fitness class, let me tell you that. It's not working out how you feel, and it's not CrossFit. Okay, so training versus working out, big difference. And you can see you're not going to get these specific qualities doing these bro splits or any of those other things. Maybe you're an outlier and you've got that aforementioned list of qualities in abundance, but the likelihood is you can't have all these qualities peaking all the time. You need to build them, rotate them, and peak the ones that you really need before competition. If you're not competing, you just want to have a general quality, that GPP we talked about, in as many of those qualities as possible. Okay. So most of the time that you spend in the weight room will be building and maintaining the general physical qualities. Yeah, across all areas of fitness. Most of your time will be spent on GPP. And then in competition, once you've got that foundation, we can get more specific, and then you can demonstrate those qualities at a level of peak performance. Okay, so that's a crash course on the kind of needs analysis for jiu-jitsu. We need a lot. It's not like we just need to be strong or need to be powerful. There's a lot of things we need there from our training. So the good news is, with proper training, we can get all those things. We've got to employ this idea called periodization, though, okay, which is kind of the meat and potatoes of this episode. It's super important to understand how to periodize, how to train over time and build these qualities and get these adaptations for those needs that we just went through. So a couple of key terms, key principles for periodization. Periodization is the division of a training year, macro cycle, nerdy term, into smaller, more manageable units, mesocycles, nerdy term, to manipulate training variables with the goal of preparing the athlete for peak performance for a competition or to manage their performance across a season, an in-season. So it's dividing up your year into more suitable bite-size training blocks, basically, training units, mesocycles. Okay, so you've got your macro cycle, your year overview, your mesocycle, usually 4 to 6 weeks blocks, and then your micro cycles or your training sessions. Yeah, so there's a scaled element there. It's kind of fractal like that. Macrocycle, mesocycle, microcycle, year, weeks, session. So one of the key principles you need to know for periodization is progressive overload. This is key. This is the foundation for improving. The story that is most often used to describe progressive overload comes from Milo of Croton back in ancient Greece, and he was carrying a newborn calf on his shoulders. Every day he'd carry the calf, and as the calf grew bigger, eventually Milo was carrying a fully grown bull on his shoulders. But that was only possible because he was carrying it as a calf, as the calf was growing. And that is progressive overload, the gradual increase of stress placed on the musculoskeletal and nervous system over time. Okay, again, time. It's gradually increasing the stress over time. You can't just jump in the deep end with loads of stress and then hope to come out the other end okay. You have to gradually overload yourself over time. So then you're probably thinking, well, how? How do you manipulate the overload? How do you vary that? Well, really, there's two key terms you need to understand for overload, and that is volume and intensity. Okay, these words are thrown around all the time in the S&C world, and they're quite important because they are the backbone of training programs. They are the backbone of periodization. So volume, that's basically, I understand it as doing more. Okay, you can do more reps, you can do more sets, you can do more training sessions, etc. So there's a volume component, the amount of work. And then there's intensity. Okay, so you can increase the weight to vary the intensity. More weight, more intense. You can reduce rest. So, resting for a shorter period of time makes it more intense. You can increase the range of motion of your exercise, can make it more intense. You can manipulate how long each repetition lasts, or what we call tempo. There's loads of ways. Okay, so intensity and volume, the relationship between the two are key, especially when it comes to progressive overload and especially when it comes to periodization. So this is where it gets interesting because there are different methods of periodization, and I think some methods of periodization are better for BJJ players when it comes to S&C than others, and I'm going to try and explain why. I'm also going to do some program reviews that I talked about, some other programs that exist out there, and some of them use some of these methods. Some of them I think are optimal, some are not. So let's have a look. Different methods of periodization then. There's block periodization, linear periodization, concurrent periodization. Those are going to be the kind of three I'm going to talk about the most. And they're the kind of big three, basically. So block periodization, what is it? It works with the idea of breaking down training into blocks. Now, we've already kind of said that a mesocycle is a block, and it's true. But block periodization focuses on developing a specific quality for that block. So common examples that you've probably heard of, maybe have, maybe haven't, is you do an accumulation block. Okay, so let's say 6 weeks, and your volume gradually increases over those 6 weeks. And then after those 6 weeks, you do an intensity block. So now the volume decreases, but the weight increases over 6 weeks. And then you do a realization block. So the strength that you've built is now expressed with super low reps and really high weights above 90%. So you're kind of 1 rep, 2 rep, 3 rep maxes, that kind of thing. Super intense. So block periodization, the advantage of it is they use it a lot with athletes that have to peak multiple times in a season. But I think grappling sports are unique, combat sports actually are unique in the sense of not only do we have to peak multiple times in a season per se, but our season is weird. It's more like we're focused towards the fight or the competition. It's not necessarily that we have a part of the year which is dedicated to competing necessarily. And also we've got so many different qualities that we need. Block periodization, if it's only focusing on one quality at a time, how are we going to get all those adaptations at once? We'll come to that in a minute. Another variation or another example of the block periodization is you do a block of hypertrophy, so muscle building, you do a block of strength, then you do a block of power, a block of speed. So you're focusing again on this sort of single quality that you're trying to get, the single adaptation, and you do it for sort of anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks before you change to the next one. From what I can remember, the submission strength program from PJ Nessler is built around this idea. A block of X, a few weeks, block of Y, a few weeks, block of Z, a few weeks, etc. So that's a little brief explanation on block periodization. It's kind of cool. It's easy to understand, but is it suitable for BJJ? Let's hold that thought. Linear periodization, okay, the most beginner-friendly method. This works over a long-term period, okay. Again, volume gradually decreases over time, intensity gradually increases over time until the athlete is peaked and ready to perform. Some people find it boring. It's the long game. But it's the easiest to understand and it's good for beginners. So the easiest example to think of is just gradually adding 5 pounds a week to your main lift until you reach the ceiling, and then you have to change the variation of the lift because you sort of plateau, you can't do it anymore. Linear periodization is great for building strength in your off season for jiu-jitsu players. But really beyond that, it's not going to cover all the bases of the other areas. But for sort of max strength, sub-max strength, even isometric strength, it will work. But beyond that, we have to think a bit more craftily on how we're going to do it. So that's linear. Concurrent, okay, concurrent periodization, training to achieve multiple goals at the same time. So concurrent has multiple training qualities trained in the same session. Okay. So speed and power, max, sub-max strength, hypertrophy, strength, endurance. You can chuck them all in the same session, providing you're programming it properly. And the more I look into what other well-respected coaches are doing with regards to periodization, regardless of sport, the more I see the concurrent strategies are being used. Okay. So I think concurrent is the way to go, personally. And even with my own experimentation of it, I've found it to be awesome. Whether I'm placebo or biased or not, who knows. But lots of people are using it to great effect. So concurrent, we can get multiple adaptations of different qualities all trained at the same time, or in the same session, I should say. They're all being trained in the same session. And judging by just how many needs we need as jiu-jitsu players, being able to train them all, or most of them at least, in a session and cycle that appropriately over time seems quite advantageous to us. Now, you've probably heard of conjugate periodization or the conjugate method as well. Conjugate is just a form of concurrent periodization, and Conjugate is basically focusing on max strength, speed and power, and hypertrophy, and they're all programmed in the same week. Conjugate is great for building strength, again, for BJJ players in the off season. Okay, it's great fun. Okay, so that's a little brief rundown on kind of the various methods of periodization. I think concurrent is the way to go. If we're talking about periodization as training over time and employing training cycles, then here's some food for thought that we're going to kind of dip into more in the coming episodes on how these training cycles would set up. Okay, how will we lay these out over time? So we're going to split the training down into these cycles or phases. Okay, so phase 1, general strength work. Okay, so max and submax strength, mostly submax to be honest, and alactic power. Okay, you can pair submax work in the weight room with alactic power, so your ability for a hard effort once, together quite nicely. They work quite well. You're building your general strength and your work capacity in the weight room, and then you're building your alactic power. Okay, so for phase 1, let's say for argument's sake 6 weeks, training twice a week, you can train those sessions twice a week of general strength work, building your work capacity, building your base, and alactic power, building your ability to express a maximal effort once. Phase 2, we now vary slightly what we want to work on. Okay, so phase 2, a bit more max strength work, yeah, around the sort of 90%, 80-90% mark. And now we're going to mix that with alactic capacity. So linking those efforts we worked on in the alactic power phase, we're now going to link them together to create alactic capacity. Yeah, again, let's say 6 weeks. And then last phase, 4 to 6 weeks, strength and speed and lactic capacity together. Okay, so strength and speed is kind of, we're now into, again, we're still in the kind of 1 to 3, 1 to 5 rep range, but we're moving lighter weights as fast as possible, or heavier weights as fast as possible. And we're mixing it with lactic capacity. So sustained high levels of effort, basically high levels of effort over longer periods of time, at least 30 seconds or more. Aerobic work is always present throughout phase 1, 2, and 3 as well. So the steady state stuff we talked about, the single modality steady state stuff, that's always present. So phase 1, I don't know, 12 weeks out from competition. Phase 2, 8 weeks out from competition. Phase 3, 4 weeks out from competition, or however you want to work back from competition. But those phases, the periodization there of breaking training down into phases, is designed to build the appropriate qualities and then hone in on the qualities we need so that they can be used in peak performance for the competition. If you're not training for a competition per se, you can still go through the phases, nothing wrong with that. But out of all the phases, the general strength and work capacity, or kind of the GPP, is phase 1, is what you might as well just keep up. Be consistent with that, and the other stuff you can add on later. So if you're interested in more of these ideas, I definitely recommend you go deeper down the wormhole online for some of the resources. Again, I'll link them in the show notes. But the Chad Wesley Smith playlist for Juggernaut training systems on strength training and BJJ is just brilliant. I like a lot of what he has to say. Very smart. Again, he's a grappler himself now, so he gets it. Again, Dr. Mike Israetel, the Renaissance Periodization crew, they've got some great information on that. Shout out to Jeffrey Chu as well, who's also came on the podcast. He's got some great ideas around combat sports in general, S&C for combat sports in general, crossing over to the striking and grappling worlds. William Wayland as well from Powering Through. He's got some really brilliant in the trenches kind of stuff with what he does with grapplers, and again, a grappler himself. So I'll link some of those resources for you in the show notes. And yeah, I look forward to going deeper down the wormholes of these topics in future episodes. I hope that's helped shed some light on periodization and the importance of training and not just working out, and kind of looking at what the needs are for the BJJ player and just how diverse they are, and how important it is to spend our time in the weight room going after these things and not just wasting our time on arbitrary sort of fitness influencer programs and YouTube workouts and just rubbish, basically, fitness classes that just aren't going to cut the mustard for what we need. If you found this useful, please pass it on to someone as well that you think might benefit from it. Check out the other episodes in the series if you haven't already, and you can subscribe to the channel, etc., for the future ones. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll catch you next time.